Thanks everyone for joining in our webinar today. Today is the conclusion of our Fireside chat series. Really excited to bring a great speaker to you today from Dell to talk about how they created a robust research strategy. So we have 30 minutes today. I'm going to go ahead and dive on in and get us started. So for some quick introductions before we start our conversation, I'd like to do some intros here. So my name is Victoria Hendrickson. I'm a partner and vice president on the consulting side at OV. But I'd like to spend a little more time introducing our guest today, Stephanie Murphy. I've gotten the pleasure to know Stephanie over our work together at IT Survey Group. She's the head of People Insights and Assessments at Dell Technologies. At Dell, she leads global projects reaching over 130,000 team members. This includes leading Dell's engagement survey, conducting research, and designing listening tools to inform Dell's talent decisions. Stephanie aided culture integrations at Dell as Dell made one of the largest acquisitions in the tech industry. She served on several boards and committees, including the HR Exchange Network, IT Survey Group, and SIOP. She was recently recognized as one of OnCon's Icon Awards in the top 10 data analytics professionals and by Diversity MBA as one of the top 100 under 50 executive and emerging leaders. Stephanie teaches management courses to grad students at Macomb University at the University of Texas at Austin, and she holds a BS in psychology from the University of New Orleans and a PhD and MA in IO psychology from Louisiana Tech. Certainly a mouthful. Lots to be proud of and excited about, Stephanie. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's always that awkward moment where someone's talking about you. You have to sit there and kind of just listen to it. So I appreciate you walking through it all.
Very exciting stuff. So, you've done a lot of exciting work. Go ahead and dive on in here. But to get us started, I've read your bio, lots of great accolades, but how would you describe your role at Dell, just in terms of general goals for you and your team?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I started off at Dell as an intern, and so was just getting my feet wet, learning the way. It was my first job outside of grad school. I immediately fell in love with the people and the culture and decided it was going to be my forever home and never going to leave. So over the course of the years, built out the People Insights team. It's always been kind of a talent management team where we did research, we kind of did assessments, we did pieces of it, but it wasn't until the last 2-3 years where we formalized the team and really set up a really cool structure. So my team owns employee listening and owns talent research and also our assessment strategy at Dell. And that reaches, like you mentioned, our 130,000 team members. So our listening strategy is all of listening across Dell. That assessment practice is our recommended assessments to be used across Dell. Mind you, there are tons of assessments still being used at Dell that are not on our recommended list, but we tried to reel those in, and then we design our assessments in-house, most of them. Even when we use kind of vendors externally, we try to create like assessments and tools and reports that align to our culture. Dell is very big on having things catered to us and designed specific for our people, and that includes our listening strategy. We design all of our questions ourselves, all of our assessments, like I mentioned, ourselves, and then our research strategy, which is the one I'm here to talk about today. That's a relatively new practice. We've always done bits of research projects. Even when I was an intern, one of my projects was to go figure out accountability at Dell. And it's like, okay, how do I even start going figure that out, right? And so it's always been like one of the parts and aspects of my job, but it's not until recently where we hired Stephanie Endel on our team to kind of lead our talent research practice from end to end, create the strategy of how we'll be more proactive and reactive to research needs.
Wow, sounds like you and your team certainly have your hands full. Plenty to do there. But yeah, as you said, let's go ahead and dig into that research strategy. I think a lot of organizations like to do research projects here and there, sometimes responding to executive questions or what's going on, but not all organizations have a research strategy, something set out so consciously. How did that come about, and how has it evolved over time?
Yeah, I think a lot of it stemmed from what we call the twin crises of 2020, where you had the kind of racial reckoning after the murder of George Floyd, but you also had the pandemic and this need for hybrid work. And we realized our team was focusing so much on not just listening and amplifying the voices of our team members, but merging that in with what's being said externally. I do think a big piece of it has been social media, where our leaders can go on LinkedIn and like, oh my gosh, there's quiet quitting or quiet firing and all these hot topics. And then they come to us like, what do we do about it? And then so we've been having to figure out whether it be kind of like I said, the twin crises or the social media pieces, all these things started coming about where we realized we need to be more strategic in how we answer those questions and how we answer them quickly. And so we've been working on building kind of like not just our reactive strategy of how to react when people give us requests for research, but how do we kind of look at the trends that are happening and proactively address those? And I think listening to our team members is a big piece of that. A lot of our kind of needs, we look at survey data and say, okay, hey, this is a topic our team members are talking about. Let's go research it. Let's go pull the external pieces off out of it. And then the other piece is the other way around is sometimes we'll see, okay, here's what's going on externally. How do we see what that looks like at Dell? And so we just kind of launched our official research strategy where we kind of walk through, here are the pieces we'll tackle. And it's a PowerPoint slide, right? That we went to their leadership team and said, here's our strategy, here's what we'll do. And then like literally last week, we came up with our roadmap for next year of what are the things we'll tackle each quarter, and then leaving some of that opportunistic time to respond, to be a little bit more reactive to things that might happen throughout the year, and creating different processes in place that allow us to quickly kind of answer those key questions, whether it be a quick pulse that we need to go do on team members, or having a strategy set up where we have like we call it a repository of just research articles and things we've seen over the time that we go and we do our own research and click around on LinkedIn and see things, keeping track of all of that, so that when we need to go pull from something, we have all of that research at our hands to allow us to respond a lot faster.
Yeah, sounds like a great mix. Can you tell us about an example, something you've done on the research strategy this year, and how that kind of sets you up for next year?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the thing that the team will probably say we're most proud of this year has been our tip sheets. So these are kind of just things that reach beyond just HR. A lot of times our research projects sit on we have an HR portal where we host all of our research for HR, but we don't always get our research into the hands of leaders and team members. And so recently we've been trying to find ways to simplify our research, where it's not just, a lot of times I think in people analytics, we want to tell people all of the amazing analytics and things that we've done. And leaders are like, yeah, what do I do about this? So we've created these tip sheets that combine cool findings we might have found internally, but also external trends to help leaders take action. So one of our first ones was building connections during a hybrid world. And so we might start off with, here's some key data points about what we see from our team members, and here's 4 things you can do for your team to go build connection in a hybrid world based on research, science, data, and facts. And then that goes out to all of our managers to help them. Another one we did was early career. We're getting a lot of just feedback from people like early career folks might not be able to like feel the culture at Dell and all these different things. And so we recently launched one that was on early career. And so just having these, like, as different topics come about, having a way to get to managers actionable things they can do as well, and not just allowing our research to really sit within HR so much. A big one that got a lot of recognition externally has been our hybrid work research. And so again, that was merging internal research and external and merging it together. We call it our Mythbusters, our hybrid work Mythbusters. All these external trends about early career people not feeling the culture, or people not being included anymore now that we're virtual, or having officeism and all these different things. Our data was showing the opposite. And so putting together the external trends and showing how our data showed up was one of our big pieces of our research strategy that launched, and we got a lot of recognition externally for that and published it a lot as well.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like a really nice blend of using all the robust statistics with Greek letters and p-values, going really deep with all of your internal experts. But of course, that's not what managers are looking for, unfortunately. Maybe a couple, but for the most part, your line managers are looking for the bullet points and the maybe infographics of what do I do today with my spare 10 minutes?
Exactly. Well, and it doesn't hurt. And I'm totally biased. Our CHRO is an IS psychologist. And so we have the advantage of, like, she gets the fact that there's like the need for data, the need for research, and the need for science. And since she's taken over as CHRO, really pushed for that in our HR function, but she also understands all the stuff under the hood. So while we sit there and crunch all the numbers, go through all 111,000 data points we might get from a survey, and then up level it to, a one slider, that impact of that work is not underestimated when you have a CHRO that understands the fact that okay, I know you spent about 15,000 hours in SPSS to get here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a story where someone asked Van Gogh for a sketch on a napkin, and he did it and asked for a lot of money, and they said it took you a minute. He said, no, it took a lifetime. All the knowledge and the how to do that for you in just a second takes a lifetime, even if it takes me a moment to execute, or in your case, one slide for a manager to digest. That's actually worth much more under the hood.
Absolutely.
What advice would you have for folks trying to balance the robust statistics that they're super proud of and their dissertation advisor would be proud of with approachability for their managers or their clients?
Yeah, it's a great question. I remember when I was an intern, one of my first presentations that was going to our CHRO at the time, I was super excited to just be able to be in the room and present to him, and spent all night making this presentation to show to my manager. And the first thing he does is look, he's like, there's these scores on here. I was like, yeah, because I had to standardize the numbers and all these things. And he was like, okay, so this is going to take some time. And so then he was like, let's break this down a little. I appreciate him so much. Till this day, we're friends, because he was very patient with me and calming me down. I'm like, hey, this is not how this goes. And then when he kind of walked me through it, we ended up with slides that literally had red, yellow, green smiley faces on them. And I remember being so upset. I was like, this is not at all what I was taught in grad school. What does a green smiley face mean statistically? I have no idea. And kind of just freaking out of all of these things. But over time, kind of realizing there is an art in taking all of those numbers and figuring out what's important. It might not be red, yellow, green smiley faces. I would probably cringe if I saw that on one of my team slides at this point, but getting to a point where it's simple. And the way I usually describe it is almost like creating a children's book where there's more pictures than words, right? And so I don't even like putting tables and graphs sometimes on a slide. It's like, how can I visualize this in a way where someone can look at it and see exactly the message I'm trying to send? And so it does get frustrating a lot of the times, because you do so much work to get to that point, and it might end up just being circles and bubbles on the slide to visualize it. At the same time, that's what a leader needs to be able to see, to say, okay, here are the 3 things I need to go do. I don't care how you got there. If you tell me you did science and data behind it, it's fine. But it also depends on your audience as well. There are certain audiences we can dive a little deeper and get into the nitty-gritty of the analytics. But for the most part, I think it's thinking of it as if you were talking to someone that has no idea anything about statistics. They might, but just thinking about it as if it doesn't. I even will have sometimes people on my team will turn to their spouses or their partners and say, hey, do you know what this means? And they're like, no. And I was like, all right, time to start over. Because if they can't get it, then someone that has no context won't be able to get it either.
That's a great test.
Right?
Good use of pulling spouse into that. That's great. So, thinking back to, kind of a little bit broader about the listening strategy and the research strategy within your listening strategy generally, do you have any guidelines for success of, this is working well? This is, doing what I hoped it would do. I think with other kinds of deliverables, we have more of a kind of concrete sense of what we've produced. But with research, it's a little ambiguous.
Yeah, so it depends on the audience. I think when our research goes to our senior leadership, the goal is to see an action taken out of that and to see it translated into something big. So when we did all the research on our hybrid work strategy, seeing Dell then implement all of those things based on the data and the research was huge. And so that being able to see the actual impact in our day-to-day was a big deal. When we're sending that research strategy and those kind of tips sheets that we do to leaders, to your point, it's a little bit less easy to understand. A lot of it is looking at engagement scores. Do we see if we ask questions about meaningful work and we just put out a tip sheet about meaningful work, we expect to see some uptick in some of those questions that we're asking. One of the ones we did was about reattaching to work after a break or after vacations that we sent out after the summer. And so we'd want to see a little bit more uptick engagement quickly after those things happening. So most of our measures are putting out tip sheets that we do ask some questions about in our employee engagement surveys and pulses that we can see, okay, if this was really impactful and actions were taken, we should see some upticks in these numbers. A lot of it is clicks on the research too. to. Leaders have so many things to do. And we have what we call our manager essentials, where it's an email with all of the things in it. And if they go through all of the things and happen to click on one of our tip sheets, we call that a win. So seeing just the number of clicks is super helpful as well.
Yeah. And of course, it would make sense that you have data on these things that you would track and do a little more research on. Okay. We're starting to get a couple of questions in here. One is about, how you do present your research to different audiences. I think we talked about often simplifying for managers, but sometimes you do have folks that are eager for more details. Do you ever ask what folks are looking for as far as the level of detail? That's the question we've got, is as far as how do you know, or do you ask what they're looking for?
Yeah, I think over time, being at Dell for so long, from my perspective, I kind of have an idea of what my stakeholders needs. But in the beginning, to the point of the question, it was very difficult to know how to do that. And a lot of it was trial and error. A lot of it was, and one of the things that we do is we create a full storyboard, like all of the things that we would want to know as data nerds, all of the things, we put all the pieces in there. And then from there, it's like, okay, now that we have the full story, what pieces of this need to go to different places, or what pieces of this need to be reframed for these different people. And so a lot of times it is like creating the whole thing and then kind of testing out, okay, I think this piece might be more important for this group. So like we might do a deep dive on inclusion and diversity, and realizing, okay, that part might be more in the weeds and detail for our culture, diversity, and inclusion team to understand. So pulling that piece out for them. And then if they come back and they have a lot of questions where they want it more, then the next time I know, okay, this team is going to be one of those teams that want all the nitty gritty details. So going back to them the next time with that from the start would be more impactful for them. And so a lot of it is just testing it out. But starting with that full story allows you to then go pull, and you're not having to go create new analytics every time you meet a new stakeholder. You can just pull pieces of it and share those bite-sized pieces with the different audiences that are necessary.
Mm-hmm. Back to kind of that glacier metaphor, where there's so much under the surface, and you determine what pieces as you go along, but you've prepped with so much for the full story.
Yeah.
A related question is, how do you determine which research topics to go after? Earlier, you mentioned, some of it's kind of proactive. You leave a little room for reactive to what's happening. How do you determine that? And do you have a couple of examples of what you're looking at now and in the future?
Yeah, great question. We just kind of did this research. Stephanie on my team just went around and talked to a bunch of our stakeholders to understand what their roadmaps are for next year. We didn't, and we were very careful with the question. The question was, hey, what research do you need from us? It was, what is your roadmap? What are you planning on doing as you go into next year? Because then we can sit there and decide what research, what analysis, what kind of listening strategy might be helpful for them as they go through their year trying to accomplish the things they're trying to accomplish. And so the first step I would say is asking their stakeholders what's top of mind for them, what are they working on, and then figuring out how you can kind of group your research to help support those things that are already touching the business, especially with business partners. They have things top of mind, might be performance or whatever it is, whatever they have top of mind. Having that idea helps us know, okay, what are some things that we can proactively share with them to support them as they go through the roadmap. The other piece is external trends. We do a ton of looking at, whether it be like the PSYOP HR trends or different trends that pop up in different places. Seeing those trends helps us kind of understand what might be coming our way, because if it starts to pop up externally, our leaders will start to see it in the Forbes and the HBR. And so keeping track of what's coming there, because eventually that's something that we might be asked for. And that's another way we've been trying to be proactive. But I will say a lot of it ends up still being reactive, because those trends change so fast. Like I mentioned, quiet quitting, quiet firing, great resignation, all these buzzwords pop up. And some of it has to be fast and reactive, just to kind of calm the spinning that some of our leaders might be experiencing when they hear all these things from their team members.
Sure. There are people out there seeing the same headlines we are. But, it strikes me that at the beginning of this, you talked about how a lot of your assessments and listening programs are very custom to Dell and your business. And so, of course, is your research strategy. It's not, topics in a vacuum of what's most interesting to an IO. It's, what furthers the strategic cause, what's going to help leaders make the decisions and, be more effective day to day.
Yeah, that's spot on.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Got lots of great questions here. Trying to put things in order here. One, maybe talking about all those different listening points. Have you been able to tie listening data to other employee data points? For example, tying listening data like surveys to learning data, performance data. Is there any linkage like that in your research strategy?
Yeah, great question. So one of the big initiatives we've had over the last 2 years has been to centralize listening. I think we had listening in several different parts all over the function. And so a big piece of it has been to bring it all into my team so that we can see the end-to-end listening strategy in one platform in one place. And so as of kind of literally probably 2 weeks ago, we have most of them in our space where from the time someone's a candidate to the time someone has the exits the company, we can see all of these kind of moments that matter, engagement, pulses, when they move to new teams. We're trying to capture that data on this entire employee life cycle from the time they enter the apply to the time they leave. And so with that comes making sure that we have that HR data included in there. And so understanding whether it be kind of potential or understanding assessment data that we use. So pulling in our assessment data and looking at the assessment, pulling in our L&D programs. We own all of our L&D surveys. So pulling in actual completion of programs to see if that's impacting engagement in different pieces. So I think bringing in all the listening allows us to do things like look at program impact, look at kind of pay impact and all these different things that then allow for that full people analytics perspective into our listening strategy.
That's helpful and aligns with the next question, which is structural. You had mentioned kind of centralizing this sort of work. So the question is, how does your team in particular work alongside people analytics and org development or effectiveness, whatever groups those might be in Dell? How do those teams work together? Is there any overlap? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, so we all sit under the same umbrella, which is magical. So my team is people insights and assessments. We have an analytics and automation team, and then we have an org analyst team. All three of us sit under the same organization, which allows us to partner very closely together. And so we utilize the data from our analytics and automation team to help drive our insights. And then we utilize our org analyst team that get all of our analysis into the business units in different ways. And so it does have a really nice flow of how we all partner together. And then those org analysts, the other way around, right? That's one flow, but the other org analysts might bring in, hey, our BUs are talking about these things. We might need some research or some insights on this. And then back to the analytics and automation team, we might need a dashboard or something created on this or this part automated. And so I think we've got a really nice flow between the three of us, making sure that our people analytics function as a whole is not just feeding one direction, but both directions. We're feeding from the business and feeding to the business in a strategic way.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And in terms of sending that information out to the business, you and your team work really hard on putting that research into action, into managers' hands. Is there any kind of mechanism for accountability, making sure it's used out there?
Yeah, so this is a good question, and we've been doing a really good job of starting to do this. Our employee engagement survey gets an over 95% response rate, so huge responses, and a lot of that is because of our culture of accountability for our leaders. All 12,000 of our leaders get leader reports, and so as I mentioned before, our research strategy often feeds those questions, and so after the murder of George Floyd, a big push for us was to get more inclusion questions into that, so that's what we did, and so there's an inclusion category in our employee engagement survey that all leaders are expected to have a conversation with their team members about, and this would help foster those inclusive environments. So all leaders are expected to have all conversations about all topics within the employee engagement survey, but adding that inclusion question allowed that accountability of that conversation to happen. We provide resources, we provide consultations for leaders with low scores, we celebrate leaders with high scores, we call them Tell Dell rock stars when they make high scores, and so I think that's that's our mechanism for accountability on a lot of pieces, is kind of making sure that team members are aware that leaders are supposed to have those conversations. And then as an HR function, we're in the loop with leaders with high and low scores on those topics.
I like that you support, folks with room for opportunity as well as your rock stars. Both are really important in that process, and continuing to emphasize those strengths.
Absolutely.
Let's see here. Got about 5 minutes left, so we can take a couple more questions while we're waiting for one or two more that look like they're typing. Asking you a really broad question in terms of, advice for practitioners setting out on their own research strategy. Do you have any learnings? What works well, what doesn't? Top tips for folks on the phone today?
In terms of what works well. So I would say what works well is a simplification. I think that I've mentioned before, I think a lot of times we've tried to get like dashboards out all the time, or all these big things that we feel like need to launch to leaders. And it often ends up being so much information that leaders don't know how to act. And so what's been really helpful for us is the simplification of a 1-slide tip sheet, the simplification of just like a couple of slides here and there from Dell results. And so just making sure that what we put out is simple enough where a leader can look at it and understand, here's the conversation I need to go have with my team, or here's kind of the improvements, the resources I need to go develop, providing them those resources so they don't have to go hunt for it themselves. And so making it as simple as possible for the leaders and team members to really make an impact has been what's working well. What's been difficult is prioritizing. There's just so many different areas we could go research, and so many different topics. There's always a new article out. There's always something to go investigate. And so we have a research strategy call that we have once a week where we're like, okay, let's look at the calendar. What can we do? What do we tackle? And so it's really trying to stay on top of the trends and stay on top of what's feasible and what we can accomplish, versus, what is something that we don't really have to tackle, what's something that can wait.
Mm-hmm. Related, we've had a question of, do you ever get pushback or resistance on, kind of dedication to these resources on a research strategy?
Say that one more time.
Any pushback or resistance to such a detailed research strategy?
Yeah, short answer is no. I think the pushback that we get is we want more than anything. I think people, at least like I mentioned, our CHRO being very data driven, she drives that culture within our entire HR function where people want to make decisions based on research and data. And Michael Dell himself is very data driven. Most of our products and services are around data and kind of the cloud and how we use these things to help companies. And so our culture in general is, we need data, we need science, we need research before this decision is made. And so I guess the biggest pushback we get is, why don't you have a team in an army, Stephanie? We need at least 60 more of you replicated so that we can go do more of these things. And I think the more we can, again, simplify, I think the other pushback would be if we did too much and it's like information overload. So I think we try our best to keep things pretty simple and straightforward, and we're not sending a ton of information where people don't know where to focus. But if in the case where we sent a 6-page report of here's all the things you can go do, I think we would get pushback of okay, yeah, that's too much, and tone it down.
So short of cloning yourself, it sounds like you've found a way to, really make the research strategy fit the business needs and also the culture. It's a science-based, research-based culture. So really feeding that.
Yeah.
And, maybe some advice for practitioners out there is find how to match that in your own culture, whatever that might be. But it's not, again, coming in with a Dust Bowl empiricism that someone could call a research strategy. It's the right research strategy for Dell that's going to help your
exactly leaders. And I think to your point earlier, as I was mentioning, Dell is very customized in what we do with everything, including our research strategy. I think it's important to do that within your own companies and cultures and figure out where can you meet people where they are and start there. Like I mentioned, I started as an intern where someone's like, we need to figure out accountability. I was like, okay. So I just kind of started with these random kind of projects, and eventually was like, wait, we need something more consistent. And that just kind of grew over time. So it's not like a button clicks on and you have a research strategy. It's definitely a matter of understanding where your company is, where your leaders are, figuring out what you can slowly kind of slide in there. It's like, hey, this might be helpful, and see how that goes. And then slowly kind of inch in and get it bigger and bigger. But it's definitely definitely starting where you are and where your leaders are first.
Absolutely. Thank you. This is all super valuable, and I think a lot of great takeaways for our attendees on the phone. I can't believe it, but we're at the end of our half hour. So thank you, everyone, for listening in today. Thank you, Stephanie, for all of your valuable insights. Just a reminder for everyone on the phone, this is the last presentation closing out our Fireside Chat series. We appreciate all of you joining us. The recordings will be on the website by the end of the week. We'll send those out to you. Should you have any questions, let us know. And as a survey organization, of course, we are going to send you a survey about how this went today and any feedback y'all have. So thanks, everyone, and we'll be in touch.